On this Thursday night, 1 month in and no end in sight. Ukraine's fierce resistance to Russian forces.
Either we go to the end or we will die fighting.
America's line in the sand.
We would respond.
And Canada's role in reducing the reliance on Russian oil. Breaking news, the CRTC's decision on a major telecom takeover. Making history, the first black woman nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court, and why Republicans are taking aim. Plus, rejecting the royals.
You want our kids to come and line up and worship you.
Jamaica's push to dethrone the Queen as head of state.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Jackson Prosco.
This is the grim scene in the city of Mariupol today as desperate residents line up for aid, surrounded by the charred remains of their bombed-out homes. Hi there, and thanks for joining us. Exactly 1 month ago, Russia launched its unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, unleashing devastation on innocent civilians and threatening global security as we know it. Today in Brussels, NATO leaders held an extraordinary meeting to address the crisis, and they heard a direct plea for military aid from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, who delivered this dire warning.
I'm sure you understand that Russia does not have any intention of stopping in Ukraine. It does not think of it, and will not. It wants to further, against eastern members of NATO, the Baltic states, Poland for sure. Will NATO then stop thinking about it? Stop worrying about how Russia will react? How can you be sure of that?
Ukrainians have mounted a surprisingly fierce resistance, and tonight, as the war enters its second month, they're looking to the west to keep up the fight against Russia. We begin with Jeff Semple in Lviv.
After 1 month of war, Ukraine's hardest-hit cities appear apocalyptic. A bird's-eye view shows the city of Mariupol before Russia's invasion and after. A resident recorded this video of his attempt to escape the port city, including images too graphic to show of a body lying in the road, with gunfire echoing through deserted streets. The warmer weather has now thawed the ground enough for survivors to begin burying the dead, including this woman's stepfather. He'd been injured, and another man offered to drive him to hospital, but then the car was attacked and blown up, she says. The UN says 4 weeks of war have killed nearly 1,000 civilians, including around 100 children, along with an unknown number of Ukrainian soldiers. There are a lot of military cemeteries in Europe full of soldiers, including Canadians who served during the First and Second World War, but it is rare to see a military cemetery with graves so freshly dug as this one. All of these soldiers have just been buried here. They were killed in the fighting over the past month against Russia. And as you can see, their faces, their birth dates, some of as young as 21 years old.
It's tragic.
This Canadian Ukrainian lives in Lviv and just buried her friend, 38-year-old Igor. Killed in the fighting almost a month ago, his body was just recovered and returned to his home city. She's not sad, she says. She's angry.
I believe that many Ukrainians also feel this sort of rage, and they're not going to give up. They said, now is the time. Either we go to the end or we will die fighting.
And that fighting spirit is paying off. The Ukrainian Navy released this video of a Russian ship in the Black Sea gutted by flames and explosions. Ukraine claims it was destroyed. Elsewhere, the Ukrainian military is pushing back, retaking territory near the capital Kyiv, thanks in part to weapons from the West. But Ukraine says that firepower is running out.
The West should be delivering more. If they don't want to take part in the war, get involved, as they say, then for God's sakes, give us the weapons, give us the tools, and we'll do the rest.
That growing optimism is palpable in Lviv, near the Polish border, which has so far been mostly spared the scars of war. This guitarist is singing a popular Ukrainian song called "Everything is Going to Be Okay." Few had expected Ukraine could withstand a Russian invasion, but after a month, it's not only standing, but standing tall. Jeff Semple, Global News, Lviv.
At their summit, NATO leaders were confronted with the realities of war today and the risks Vladimir Putin might go even further. Ukraine insists more military aid is now a matter of life or death, and President Zelenskyy told the alliance to stop being afraid of how Russia might respond. David Akin reports from Brussels on how much support the West is willing to offer.
Extraordinary summits for extraordinary times.
The most serious security crisis in a generation.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau joined U.S. President Joe Biden and other NATO and G7 leaders in talks on next steps to isolate Russia, protect Ukraine, and plan for what they called a reset of the defense of Europe.
The Russian invasion, President Putin's invasion of Ukraine, has changed our security environment for the long term. It's a new reality. It's a new normal.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy joined NATO and G7 leaders via video conference, and he was blunt. You have thousands of fighter jets, he said, but we haven't been given one yet. You have at least 20,000 tanks. Ukraine asks for 1% of all your tanks. But NATO is not giving up any tanks or planes, though it will provide more anti-tank weapons and air defense systems. Trudeau promised Canada would provide more lethal equipment in the coming weeks, and he also announced $55 million in humanitarian aid. Meanwhile, some NATO allies are boosting defense spending to meet the new Russian threat.
Security does not come for free, and doing more will cost more.
Trudeau said Canada understands that.
We will continue to be increasing our defense spending.
But he provided no details.
We continue to have those discussions at home. We have a budgetary process underway right now.
The Trudeau government will also seek to find a way for Canada to increase food production at home and abroad.
This illegal war in Russia and its impact both on Ukraine and on Russia is going to lead to real challenges around food security in the world, and it's certainly something that, as leaders, we are united on wanting to address.
Canada did levy some new sanctions today against more Russians. Canada also tightened export rules when it comes to Russia, but Canada is being asked to do more. The next time NATO leaders meet, it will be in June in Madrid, and every NATO leader, including Justin Trudeau, is expected to show up at that meeting with precise details about how they'll increase military spending and provide more military aid to the NATO mission here in Europe. Jackson.
David Akin in Brussels. Thanks, David. Sanctions and NATO's military buildup have not been enough to pressure Vladimir Putin to change course. But for the first time, NATO leaders say the use of chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons by Russia would be a red line and provoke a direct response. Heather Yourex-West reports on NATO's strategy and whether it will force Russia to back down.
With a meeting of NATO, the G7 and the European Union in one day, Western allies are hoping to show a strong and united front. But while Western forces will remain on the sidelines of this conflict for now, there were veiled warnings Thursday that could change if the Russian president crosses a line.
Any use of chemical weapons will totally change the nature of the conflict. It will be a blatant violation of international law, and it will have widespread consequences.
The U.S. has been warning for weeks now Russia could be planning a chemical weapons attack in Ukraine. It's now set up a so-called Tiger Team, a group of security experts at the ready should chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons be deployed.
We would respond. We would respond if he uses it. The nature of the response would depend on the nature of the use.
The use of such weapons of mass destruction would put people well beyond Ukraine's borders at risk. It's why NATO's top military commander has now activated the coalition's chemical, biological, and nuclear defense elements, with allies agreeing to supply equipment to Ukraine to help with detection, protection, and medical support.
There is a visceral horror of the use of these weapons of mass destruction. I think that if Putin were to engage in anything like that, the consequences would be very, very severe.
I think we are at this pivotal moment, and just from what we know of Putin and his strategy, he needs to be able to declare that he has won in some way. And that's looking harder and harder in terms of the ground campaign.
And the risk of escalation intensifies as this conflict rages on. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Washington.
Soldiers from Quebec are the latest to join NATO's collective defense in Europe. About 80 troops left Quebec City last night for Latvia as part of Operation Reassurance. They're joining more than 1,300 Canadian Armed Forces personnel already in the region, and 40 more are expected to fly out later. And at the same time, Canadian soldiers have been banned from going directly into Ukraine to help fight Russia. The chief of the defense staff, General Wayne Eyre, gave the order. It applies to both full-time members and part-time reservists. The only exception is if Eyre specifically approves their presence in Ukraine. Before the war, Canada had 250 military trainers there. They were sent to Poland just prior to the invasion and retasked with providing humanitarian support. Boris Romanchenko, the 96-year-old Ukrainian Holocaust survivor killed in a Russian attack on his apartment building, has been laid to rest. A small group of relatives gathered to pay their final respects, including his son. Romanchenko lived through the Nazi occupation of Ukraine. He survived 4 concentration camps and devoted his life to preserving the history of the Holocaust. Romanchenko died Friday. Well, as the world moves away from Russian oil and gas, Canada's energy sector is rushing to step in as a friendly alternative. They're ramping up production of fossil fuels for export to the U.S. and Europe. As Abigail Beeman explains, it's still not enough to offset what Russia produces.
The West is clear it wants to stop dependency on Russian oil, but actually doing so is more complicated. European countries have been asking Canada for help.
What we can do in the immediate term is very limited just because we didn't invest much since 2014 in the Canadian industry.
Thursday, Canada announced it can increase oil and gas production by the end of 2022 up to 200,000 barrels of oil a day and up to 100,000 equivalent barrels of natural gas.
We recognize that replacing Russian oil and gas in the short term is going to be important. Canada can play perhaps a modest role in that, but our commitment to reaching net neutrality by 2050, to hitting our climate commitments by 2030, remains as firm as ever.
Modest in the face of Russia, which produces 10 million barrels a day. Canada's 300,000 would flow through existing pipelines down to the U.S. Gulf Coast. The Natural Resources Minister says some may be used by the U.S. to offset Russia. The rest will be shipped to the international market, mainly Europe. The government stresses this won't impact Canada's climate goals. Environmentalists disagree.
Those two things cannot exist at the same time. We cannot increase our oil and gas production while also meeting our climate goals in the long term.
They can start now, but they should have thought of this 7 years ago.
Conservatives blame a lack of liberal investment in the sector.
Now we need output. Now we need workers, and we don't have either because of their actions. We are paying the price.
While the U.S. and allies discuss the possibility of a further release of oil from storage to help calm markets.
With respect to the emergency stockpile, these are ongoing discussions, and all those tools are certainly on the table.
While increasing production to help Europe is the immediate goal, Canada and allies are firm that a transition to clean energy and renewables are the medium and long-term goals. The Liberals trying to convince people they can do both. Abigail Beeman, Global News, Ottawa.
North Korea carried out a test of what may be its largest intercontinental ballistic missile yet. Its military has fired multiple missiles in recent weeks, but today's ICBM launched appeared to be newer and more powerful than its last test 5 years ago. The missile flew longer and further than previous launches before crashing into Japanese waters. South Korea conducted its own missile tests immediately after in retaliation, a move that violates UN Security Council resolutions. To approve or not to approve? Coming up, the decision on whether to allow the mega merger between Rogers and Shaw. Canada and Britain launched free trade talks in Ottawa today in an effort to deepen ties already worth $42 billion.
We want to make it easier for British and Canadian businesses of all sizes to trade with one another by breaking down some of the non-tariff barriers that some small and medium-sized businesses feel have held them back.
that they are scaling up.
Canada's Trade Minister Mary Ng says negotiations are an opportunity to make sure everyone benefits from trade, including underrepresented groups. The first round of negotiations begins on Monday. PEI farmers could soon resume exporting potatoes to the U.S. after Canada suspended shipments over potato wart. As part of the deal with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, there are still some restrictions. Potato wart poses no threat to human health, but can reduce crop yields. The PEI Potato Board says the export ban imposed in late November cost island farmers more than $25 million. And Canada's broadcast regulator has conditionally approved Rogers' $26 billion takeover of Shaw, a major step forward in a merger that could reshape the country's telecommunications sector. In its ruling, the CRTC outlined several requirements, including annual reports on Rogers' pledge to bolster local news coverage and a $27 million contribution to Canada's broadcasting system. The takeover still needs the approval of two other government regulators. The judge who could make history in America's highest court. Ahead, the partisan pushback in the way.
You're watching Global National.
Well, history is unfolding in the U.S. tonight, where for the first time a black woman is set to be appointed to that country's Supreme Court. Like so much of American life, the court is deeply divided down political lines, and Ketanji Brown Jackson has found herself at the center of a deeply partisan battle. Reggie Cecchini joins us from Washington on this final day of confirmation hearings. Reggie?
Jackson, this is a moment of history playing out in real time. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson following a path blazed by the women elevated to the Supreme Court, both past and present. But if confirmed, she'll become the first black woman on the highest bench in the United States. It fulfills President Joe Biden's campaign promise, one that was met with predictable partisan charges that aim to link this nomination with a far-left progressive movement. For more than 20 hours over the course of the week, Judge Jackson was subjected to questions over previous judicial rulings to which some Republicans alleged bias to defendants. Race and gender issues were also used as political ammunition, leaving Jackson almost exacerbated at times.
I am not importing my personal views or policy preferences.
I am questioning your discretion, your judgment. That's exactly what I'm doing.
So you wouldn't say that you're an activist, Judge?
I would not say that.
Judge Jackson earned our highest rating, well qualified for an appointment to the Supreme Court.
Now, that last remark comes from the American Bar Association on Thursday, who lined up with Democrats in promoting Judge Jackson's record as one whose decisions that could be generational being beneficial to both the court and the country, even though polling from earlier this year shows the majority of Americans view the Supreme Court as one that's motivated by partisanship. Now, for all the political posturing, there's not much Republicans can do to stop Jackson's confirmation at this point. Democrats can use their slim majority to confirm her, something that will cement her place in the history books, but not change the conservative majority on the court. Jackson?
Reggie Cecchini in Washington. Thanks, Reggie. Next, the country cutting off the crown after a royal couple's royal backfire. Queen Elizabeth marked a historic 70-year reign last month. Now she marks a first in the fashion world, gracing the cover of Vogue magazine. A young Elizabeth will be featured on a special cover for British Vogue's April issue, part of a special tribute to the monarch's Platinum Jubilee. The issue arrived just weeks before she celebrates her 96th birthday. But not everyone is celebrating the monarchy these days, especially in the Caribbean. Jamaica is the latest country planning to sever ties with the Commonwealth, following an earlier decision by Barbados. The surprise announcement came during a visit to the island by Prince William and the Duchess Kate. And as Mike Drolet explains, their royal tour brought back painful memories in the former British colony.
There was never a sense meeting the Jamaican Prime Minister would be anything more than a photo op for the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. They signed a guest book, received a gift, before nodding politely as Andrew Holness dropped this bombshell.
We are moving on, and we intend to attain in short order our development goals and fulfill our true ambitions and destiny as an independent, developed, prosperous country.
Will and Kate's tour commemorating the Queen's Platinum Jubilee was intended to be a reminder to Belize, Jamaica, and the Bahamas about their special connection to the monarchy, not to dredge up memories of colonialism and slavery. Yet every attempt to work their royal charm has fallen flat. A soccer match played in khakis was openly ridiculed, as was the image of the royals shaking hands with children through a fence.
I think it just shows the depths to which, people feel no particular connection to this institution other than the question of, well, when are you going to pay back what you owe?
Removing Queen Elizabeth as head of state will take time and a referendum.
Apologies now, reparations now!
What Jamaicans want now is an official apology along with reparations, much more than the remorse Prince William showed in a speech.
I want to express my profound sorrow. Slavery was abhorrent, and it should never have happened.
You don't choose to apologize. You don't choose to ask for forgiveness. You don't choose to repay 1 penny. Yet, you want our kids to come and line up and worship you. This has to stop.
There's no doubt the Duke and Duchess's trip to the Caribbean has been anything but paradise. They still have one more stop on their Jubilee journey, the Bahamas, which is shaping up to be another royal pain. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
And that's Global National for this Thursday night. I'm Jackson Prosco. Tonight's Your Canada is this herd of goats by the side of the road near Nordegg, Alberta. We love seeing your Canada. Please email pictures to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join us again tomorrow. Have a great night.